Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar sponsored by Consumer Physics, the makers of SCIO Cup, in partnership with Rock River Labs, DFA, Dairy Farmers of America, and Vita Plus. My name is Hagai Eshes. I'm the head of marketing at Consumer Physics. We'll learn about the impact of dry matter on animal performance and on profitability from quite an impressive panel of dairy veterans. Starting with Dr. John Gazer, Nutrition Director at Rock River Labs. John got his PhD in animal nutrition from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he also serves as an adjunct professor in the Dairy Science Department. On this panel, we will also get some real-world examples from Rick Volten and John Paul Heavyside, two dairy industry veterans who currently lead the business development and sales at DFA. And from another dairy industry veteran, Mr. Nathan Hrnicek, who is the Forage Products Specialist at Vita Plus. Make sure to stay for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation, where we'll answer any questions you may have. When's a good time to ask questions? Throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. We will present the questions to the panel at the end. Before we start the presentation, I would like to run a quick one-question poll. You should see it coming up in a second. Okay. So how often should dry matter be measured at the dairy farm, you think? Please select the choice that you think best describes how often should dry matter be measured. I'll give this a few seconds. I assume you see all the responses. Okay, so I see 53%, 52% answered once a day, followed by twice a week, then once a week. It's interesting and very related to the topic of this discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn to Dr. John Gazer. John, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Guy, and to all of you out there. I appreciate you spending some of your Monday with us, whether it be morning or afternoon or evening. And I'm going to share a bit of my experience with the consumer physics team and exploring what the SCIO Cup is capable via my Rock River Laboratory role in the world. And we will, though, first discuss just a touch of what opportunities may be encompassed with checking in on dry matter a little bit more frequently. I see via the results of the poll, we've got a fairly receptive audience toward very frequent dry matter checks, yet in my experience within the industry, I think the poll representation is a little bit different than reality for dairy and beef feed yards out there. And so we will talk about some of the unrecognized costs and perhaps opportunities leading into then some experience with the SCIO Cup. So my background, trained at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as Hagai mentioned, and have been overseeing animal nutrition with Rock River Laboratory for about 8 years now. And that's primarily where my experience with the team has been. So with that, we will get started. One aspect of my role with Rock River Laboratory, in particular the last 2 or 3 years, has been shifting from a optimum or maximum performance mindset to a marginal mindset, meaning focusing more on efficiency opportunities throughout managing agribusiness. Agribusiness most of the time is within the dairy industry, but also beef feed yards. And then in some of my consulting roles, working with various allied industry in a business-to-business setup, where we are looking to identify, whether it be a product or a management or seed corn, for example, an impact on feed conversion efficiency. And I speak more in terms of efficiency, recognizing that learning from my late father, who was in business with his 2 brothers as a dairy owner, where he had prior been a nutritionist for 25 years, we can produce a lot of milk, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are profitable. We have, reflecting back on the slide I have up at this point, These are margin records over the last 15 to 20 years. So I would like to give credit to my colleague, Mark Linsmeyer at Margin Smart. Many of you that have been part of various webinars and discussions, earlier presentations when we were in person would recognize some graphics such as this. But if we look back at 15 years, recognizing that on the y-axis, we have margin per hundredweight of milk here in the United States. This is looking at return on investment, if you will. And so above the blue line, following my cursor, we would have positive margins, upwards of $8 per hundredweight. And below the blue line, this would represent being in the red, not being able to cover our bills. I broke into the industry in 2009, and so we can recognize pretty strong negative margins that happened around that period of time, which somewhat imprinted my career, recognizing it's one thing to have an academically better way to go about feeding cows and producing milk. However, we've got to be able to connect to the bottom line. And so what I've recognized the last, I guess, 10 plus years that I've been in the industry is that we've been experiencing, for the most part, with the exception of the last, I guess, 3 years prior to earlier 2020, fairly stable margins around break even, although the volatility that I had previously expected to be the norm has returned here in the last quarter and looks to be continuing on into 2020 when we look at forecasted margins per hundredweight of milk. So with an efficiency mindset, speaking to identifying opportunities to improve a dairy or a beef feedlot's bottom line, I've recognized that there are a number of ways to go about doing that and identifying profitability opportunities that might not be readily apparent. I've recognized, and I present this slide just to detail some of my experience working not only domestically in the United States, as I take up residence in Wisconsin, working out of Rock River Laboratories' main office, but have worked from California to New York with experience primarily in the dairy industry. And then over the last few years have done a fair bit of work in South America with colleagues in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and then also working with colleagues remotely in Europe, Germany primarily, but also in northwestern Russia, and then in Spain. And what I'd like to highlight here is one, experience through a number of different continents in agriculture and dairy production, but also to recognize that the challenges and as I choose to think of them, opportunities that are presented for a given dairy, whether it be in the United States, South America, or in Europe, are very similar. To detail the opportunity at the root of our discussion today, we're talking about variation. We're talking about variability in feed. And the term variation is used fairly frequently, although I think at some level our understanding of what variation really is, statistically speaking, it probably leaves something to be desired. Here in this picture, we can see variation. This is a dairy I had visited in California in the past, and we can visibly see color differences between the different feeds that will ultimately be mixed into a total mixed ration and fed to dairy cattle. I will give the nutritionists and dairies to the west and to the south credit in that they've recognized for the purchased feeds and commodities, there is variation in nutrition profile in these feeds within a given feed. For example, of say almond hulls or maybe soy hulls, that they will be somewhat variable from week to week, from month to month. So that we have checked in on these nutritionally, and in the case of a wet co-product such as citrus pulp or wet corn gluten feed, we'll check in on dry matter of that so that we can maintain a bit more consistency in pounds of dry matter fed and then also in nutrient supply from each of these given feeds. Although at some level, I think that we have assumed there is a little bit more consistency in our forages than we should be assuming. We're focusing in on precision and efficiency opportunities today, and we're going to speak about dry matter. Referencing some of Bill Weiss's work, he and Norm St. Pierre at the Ohio State University have done quite a bit of work evaluating both dry matter and changes in actual nutrient supply impact on dairy cattle performance. And at some level, they've found that dairy cattle can handle, if you will, changes in nutrient supply or even pounds of various ingredients changes within a given week, but they have documented that a 3-unit dry matter or moisture change is very normal for a dairy farm in the United States. The way they came about this was by surveying and working with feed and forage analyses from commercial dairies, working in conjunction with practicing dairy nutritionists. And so while in some cases we may not recognize animal performance swings, provided we keep enough feed in front of cows, which many managers and dairies are very good at, adjusting based on bunk calls the prior day, adjusting intakes up or down or animal numbers up or down. There are some unrecognized purchased feed cost ramifications alongside simple dry matter errors on a day-to-day basis that I see unfortunately playing out, but recognize can materialize in a feed cost per hundredweight opportunity. Before getting into these, when discussing checking dry matter on farm, recognize that dry matter measures are quite unique in that there are two main ways of going about determining dry matter. Really what we seek to do is account for the nutritional value of feed that provides some energy and or protein to the cow. So in most cases, we will remove the water and then weigh the sample before and after the drying and the water has been removed. However, we've recognized, and this is probably a 75-year-old story at this point, as there is literature dating back to the 50s describing some of the unrecognized errors that can happen with weight lost upon drying techniques, such as would be the case with a forced air oven, with wet and or poorly fermented samples where we have a substantial volatile fatty acid or alcohol component resulting from ensiling and fermentation. Recognize that what you smell when we grab hold of some silage or when we walk up to a bunker pile and safely, hopefully, are volatile factors to these feed, and these do provide energy to cows. But with some research initially published as an abstract in 2015 that we've discussed, and then, like I mentioned, probably 50 to 75 years of research prior to that, oven techniques, and in particular, a very common approach to determining dry matter on farm, a coster or forced air oven on farm, maybe like an air fryer or dehydrator. These will not only volatilize the water, but we will typically dry samples until the weight is stable. So if we start with 100 grams and we dry it for an hour, or in the case of a dehydrator for 12 to 24 hours, and we end up with a weight of say 35 grams, that would represent an estimate of 35% dry matter. However, we have not only volatilized off the water, we have also volatilized off fermentation acids, alcohols to a nearly 100% extent. And what we've found through research is that NIR can actually be a little bit more precise in that it's only seeing the water molecules when benchmarked against a really solid laboratory technique that more accurately reflects the dry matter. So I typically think of NIR as being inferior relative to wet chemistry, meaning that it is always benchmarked against wet chemistry. However, in this particular application, an NIR approach may be a bit more accurate in that it is seeing strictly the water and accounting for that. So just an interject there and a heavy scientific topic, and one that warrants more discussion beyond today, but we won't get into it in any further depth than this. Coming back to what can be realistic dry matter variation or moisture variation on farm, I'll bring up a case study. This is a real working example of a many thousand ton corn silage pile. I think this one actually was in excess of 50,000 ton. And many would assume that this amount of feed with harvested forage from many different fields, many different acres, coming in with multiple choppers, for example, would be a fairly consistent feedstuff with fields blended throughout the pile. However, as we tracked dry matter, as we look at this plot, for example, where we would have a month separated by these two grid lines, we can see numerous realistic dry matter or substantial dry matter changes. Each single dry matter measure done by the dairy on say every other day basis is represented by the red dot, whereas the black dots represent the 3 sample moving average. And we can see several different periods of time where within a 2-week period, we would have as much as 2 to 3 or even 4 units of dry matter change. And so back to Bill Weiss's comment that a 3-unit dry matter change is very realistic and normal. Here's just one real-time presentation of that from a dairy in 2019 on a very large corn silage pile. So with a 3-unit dry matter change in mind, this is a fairly busy slide, but what I will portray to you is on the top half, this would be a diet that a nutritionist would have formulated for a dairy with corn silage, alfalfa silage, high moisture corn, and some sort of purchased protein and mineral mix, and then the reflective costs of these. So with corn silage and alfalfa silage here in this case, with 2 wet forages being the lower cost forages, and then purchased feed in the case of protein and mineral costs of $550 per ton. With a formulated dry matter at 35%, and nutritionists will balance based on pounds of dry matter. So here in this case, for a 56-pound total dry matter intake, we would have 22 pounds of corn silage, 10 pounds of alfalfa silage, 8 pounds of high moisture corn and 16 pounds of protein and mineral mix on a dry matter basis. If we had a 35% corn silage, then the diet would be fed as balanced for a total cost per cow of $7.74 at a roughly 50 to 60% forage amount. However, in cases where we have, say, a rainfall event, and so just speaking to a story last week, reflecting that, say, following a 1 or 2 inch rainfall event, how dry matter may actually be affected in some of these larger piles for upwards of 3 to 4 days, if you can believe it, of driving rains coming into the pile through intense tracking like I have represented here. We recognize that we can have substantial impact for days on end. But if we had a rainfall event that, say, increased the moisture content to 68 or decreased the dry matter, recognizing the dairy is very well managed, what they would probably do in this case would be make bunk calls the day following the rain, or even the second day, recognizing that the cows were out of feed, and then would probably bump up the total cow numbers in the pen without checking the actual numbers, just to make sure that there's enough feed in front of cows. What happens in this situation is that the diet becomes imbalanced. We don't necessarily recognize a change in animal performance or even components. This is a very subtle change, one that isn't going to represent a drastic performance difference. We still have, in this case, 56 pounds of total feed intake because the feed manager has done a good job in ensuring there's enough feed. However, we've got an unbalanced now ration, and again, not one that is unhealthy. However, we are making up the lost dry matter provided by the corn silage because we were feeding in an as-fed amount of up to 65 pounds. We have an increase in protein and mineral mix fed to make up for the dry matter that was not fed due to the corn silage because there was more water with each bucket of feed. This represents a hidden cost in increased in purchase feed costs. So instead of $7.74 per cow per day, we have an actual fed cost of about $8.01 per cow per day, representing a net increase in cost of roughly 25, just upwards of 27 cents per cow per day. And these are the types of opportunities that I see playing out all too frequently in situations where we do not have a routine program in place to check dry matter on a more frequent basis than say every week, every other week, or once a month. With this, I will pass it back over to Hagai for a bit of discussion around the cup itself.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Indeed, SCIO Cup is an instant on-farm forage dry matter analyzer. It's a solution that we developed that includes a smart cup where you put in your forage sample. It connects to your mobile phone with a dedicated app that runs all the dry matter analysis algorithms on our cloud that is constantly being updated and field tested across seasons and across forage types. The company was founded in 2011 by a top team of scientists and subject matter experts who've been developing this product for several years now, and it's being used by some of the leading industry brands today. Let's see how nutritionists, how producers are using SCIO Cup today to measure dry matter really with a click of a button.
This video will show you how to properly measure silage dry matter with SCIO Cup. First, make sure you have the app installed on your phone. Download it from the App Store for iPhones or Google Play for Android phones. Once the app is installed, sign in and pair SCIO Cup with your phone. Simply follow the instructions in the app. You'll only have to do this once. Now let's see how to measure forage dry matter. Make sure the cup is clean and empty of any leftovers from previous scans. Take a representative sample of the forage you'd like to scan. Fill the cup to its brim. Give the sample a good mix. If you're scanning under direct sunlight, use the lid when scanning. Turn on SCIO Cup by pressing the button for 2 seconds and place it on the ground or other solid and steady surface. Right, we're now ready to measure dry matter. Launch the app. Select the silage type. SCIO Cup supports a large variety of forage types. So again, In this case, we're measuring dry matter in fermented corn silage. If it's the first time measuring silage from this silage pit, enter its name. Next time you measure silage from this pit, simply select it first. Click the button on the cup or tap the scan button in the app, and you'll get the results in the app within a few seconds. If internet connection is not available, don't worry. You can still click to measure silage, and you will get the dry matter results as soon as the internet is back. Simply click on hit.
And it can be purchased by DFA members from DFA. If you're a Vita Plus partner or customer, you can also purchase it from Vita Plus, or you can purchase it online at consumerphysics.com. And we'll talk about this in more detail after the presentations. So at this point, I'd like to turn it to John Paul and Rick from Vita Plus. Sorry, from DFA, from Dairy Farmers of America, to share some real-world examples of the impact of dry matter and their use of SCIO cup. John Paul and Rick.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Paul Heavyside. I'm with DFA Farm Supplies. I manage our sales team in the western half of the U.S.
And I'm Rick Volten, and I am the business development manager and sales manager for the eastern half of the U.S., so everything from the Plain States over to the Atlantic.
To give you some real world examples of some of the experience that we've had with SCIO Cup and consumer physics, and also talk about some of the feedback that we've had from dairy users and our sales team since the product launch. So our purchasing staff at DFA has been working with consumer physics for a couple of years now, but they work with them as part of our initiative at DFA to provide products and services to our cooperative members that can have a positive impact on the dairy farm. We see the SCIO Cup as a product that checks all the boxes when providing a positive experience. You know, from product training to timely support to product features of durability, easy to use, portable. The real value in the product is obviously in the time and the convenience. Let's take a look at some of the feedback from the Western U.S. From our customers and the sales team, and then Rick will share some of the Eastern U.S. feedback. We have a wide range of herd sizes in the West that have used the SCIO Cup and purchased one so far. We've got multiple site farms, we've got feed consultants, nutrition consultants, and we also have custom harvesters that have purchased a unit. You know, we have some early adopters of technology also who said, you know, as you can see on the right here, can you have one here tomorrow? We also see consistent desire from farm managers to be able to test every dry matter on every feed that's on the farm. We know, you know, with this product launch being 3 months in now, that they don't have all the applications ready yet, but they're quickly working on new ones, like what distiller's grain was a big piece that some of our members in the West were interested in. You know, the ROI, the return on investment, is an interesting conversation moving forward, because obviously the product launch happened during corn harvest this year. So we had scale house employees begging just to take the coster out of their scale house because they can't stand the smell of it anymore. We had customers, you know, also see an immediate savings in time. So now that harvest is over, we have, you know, a more important discussion to have with value in mind. And this is really around how often to test dry matter. We learned just a little bit from Dr. John Gazer about that. You know, the return on making adjustments more frequently on the farm. What does that look like? So the tracking opportunities is also another really nice feature that people are starting to use a little more past harvest season. They're using it with their nutritional consultant. They're making changes a little more quickly. You know, we've seen a few objections on the farm with cost, but you know, most of those have been resolved really quickly by the reality of time savings. I'll pass this on to Rick now, and he can share some of the Eastern thoughts.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John Paul. I'll be sharing with you some of the details on farms in the eastern half of the U.S. that have been using the SCIO Cup. Since the beginning of summer, we've conducted demonstrations on over 150 dairy operations, with 25 of those farms purchasing a unit. We've demoed it on pretty much all sizes of farms with interest from most. So it's really not just for the larger dairy operations out there. We've been mostly testing corn, alfalfa, and grass silages, but both in silage crop as well as green chop. Most of the farms were a little skeptical at first. Some had seen some on-farm NIR tests in the past, but after running a few samples for them, almost all agreed that this was a little bit different than what they had seen before. Those that have purchased a unit, all were using either a coster, a microwave, or sending samples to a lab, or maybe a combination of all of those. But because of the time of the year when we were out demoing the units, the initial interest was on green chop haylage and corn silage. But by now, almost all have begun using the unit for testing their ensiled forages. Before getting a SCIO Cup, most of these farms weren't testing daily. But with the Cup, all of them are now starting to test their forages daily, or specifically after a significant weather event. Most of the farms have set up multiple users for one Cup. Primarily it's the owner. They'll have a feed manager on it and also some feeders. In some cases, they may have users set up that maybe are only using it 1 or 2 times a year. For instance, one farm had a person assigned just to recording green chop corn silage readings. And because of the layout of the farms that we've been working with in the East, we haven't yet had a farm that needed more than one unit. With the initial setup, we try to be on the farm to compare the results of the new unit with the one that we have in the field. We had one situation where the farm's Cup wasn't really looking like it was testing accurately. So we contacted SCIO, and in a few days that farm had a new unit, which has been working fine, and the farm's extremely happy with the results of it, as well as the good customer service. We've also demoed the Cup for other stakeholders, nutritionists and custom harvesters. We've had a couple nutritionists purchase units through us. Most have not gotten to some of the other functions of the software, like graphing. But now that we're past the busy harvest season, I'm really expecting more of them to start taking advantages of those features. The benefits of the Cup probably can be summarized in just 3 words. It's convenient, fast, and consistent. The portability of the unit allows for the easy application at multiple sites. The carrying case really eliminates any concerns on the farm that's going to be damaged, when it's not in use. And one of the key benefits, as John Paul mentioned, is really the speed of the test. The labor savings is really measurable. And really, while they may not eliminate a position, that person can really focus on other tasks rather than spend time running samples. This has also made it easier to increase the frequency of testing and to adjust rations as needed. And finally, the consistency of the results has been a benefit. It reduces some of the variability there can be with cooking and weighing samples, and they can run multiple samples with a SCIO Cup in less time than it took to cook down one sample. And so this allows for just a better representative sample to base some feed decisions on. The results on the farm so far have been really positive, and I haven't received any data from the farm showing impact on milk or performance, but I like the comments from a couple of producers who've been using this for a few months. When we asked them about it, they said that one of them said that the cows haven't run out of feed yet. And another one told me, when the cows don't run out of feed, I know they're making me money. So I once had a nutritionist tell me that cows don't lie or cheat. So I guess in these 2 cases, they're probably telling us that the Cup's working fine for them. So thank you.
Rick, thank you, John Paul from DFA. I'd like to remind everyone, feel free, we're getting very nice questions from participants. Feel free to ask if you have any questions in the chat box. I turn it back now to Dr. John Gazer to speak to the validation studies that our partners at Rock River Labs conducted with SCIO Cup. So, John, back to you.
In working with the second instrument, and one that has been, from my understanding, engineered from the ground up for agricultural application in forages, in the future probably some other feedstuffs as well, but we at the Rock River Laboratory team thought it necessary to take a proactive position in understanding what the cup was capable of doing. It was a bit in contrast to some of our prior experiences with other instruments in the past. And so with this interest, in April of 2020, we had a number of cups that were deployed across numerous Rock River Laboratory locations, and we were actively scanning samples, making dry matter records via the cup, as well as performing the routine Rock River Laboratory analyses with the robust quality control and reporting that goes along with that. It's important to point out that we had multiple instruments deployed in numerous states. So as I mentioned, New York, Wisconsin, and California, and multiple users within each location. So providing a somewhat real-world level of repeatability through this project. It wasn't simply one laboratory and one cup. We ended up with roughly 270 comparisons representing corn silage, legume, and mixed grass legume silages. And I typically will use SAS JMP to do statistical analyses. I did use a box and whisker plot and an outlier identification approach to remove 6 samples, and then performed an analysis of variance, and then looked at a linear regression model, recognizing that there are several different models representing corn silage, legume, and mixed grass silages. The results of the first study, and there were 2 that we were done, look like this. And I've taken some snapshots of the different JMP reports. This is unpublished data at this point. However, we have shared it numerous times. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide, we have the laboratory value for dry matter in this case, and then we would have the SCIO cup on the x-axis predicted value. You can see a great degree of linearity, and if you look very closely, the reason I used a multiple linear regression model was I allowed the different feed types to come into the model and found ultimately that they were not significant, but you can see the predicted lines for each of the different feeds: red for corn silage, green for legume silages, blue for mixed silages of legume and grass. They were virtually identical. When we looked at the intercept, it was not significantly different from 0, and the slope of the line was 1.02 to 1, so essentially 1 to 1. However, what I sought most to understand, and our team did, recognizing the R-square, adjusted R-square was 0.95, very good agreement in the data, but I wanted to understand the root mean square error. In the event that somebody grabs hold of a sample, makes one single analysis, and then sends the sample to the laboratory, what might be the type of error that would be acceptable? And so you can see not perfect fit, although in my opinion, very good fit, and recognizing a root mean square of a 1.78. So I'll interpret this on the following slide. I should say one further following slide. In August, recognizing that as the cup was being deployed commercially, we were also starting to analyze green chop forages. This graphic and statistical analysis represents whole plant chopped corn samples, freshly chopped green chopped corn, not yet ensiled. Here we have the laboratory moisture, in this case, not dry matter any further, and then the SCIO cup moisture predicted. So we see reasonable agreement in the data, although recognizing we have a more limited range. We pulled this together as we were getting samples from commercial growers and dairies and feed yards and nutritionists, a range in moisture from about 60 to 75. So roughly half to 1/3 of the range represented in the prior validation set. However, it's still a very strong R-square at a 0.88 and very similar root mean square error of about 1.78. We looked at the residuals as well in this case to identify if drier or wetter samples may deviate with the model. It didn't appear so, very normal distribution to the residuals. So very similar performance between the 2 validation studies, and I'm comfortable with this estimated root mean square error or standard error of roughly 1.78, 1.77. So what does that mean? Practically speaking, a standard error represents the result that, say, 2/3 of the time we could expect the deviation from the laboratory to be within. So on average, we got the exact same result. If I make an analogy to shooting at a target, we can see here that we have several different shots, if you will, and if we average all of these, we will hit dead center in the middle of the target. But if we shoot any one single time, there will always be a touch of drift to that. So that's, for example, when we sight in a rifle, or a different optics. We will shoot several times and then average the results of those groups. So as I equate the standard error to this target analogy, we can see the inner green circle here that would represent a standard error of 1.8 units. So 2/3 of the time, the dry matter measurement by the cup relative to Rock River Laboratories robust measures is going to be 1.8 or less. I also looked at the data and looked at the raw deviation, or the absolute value of the deviation from the cup relative to the laboratory. And what we found was that 90% of all of these samples analyzed, whether it was the validation study 1 with fermented forages or study 2 with the green shot forage, less than 90% of the data had a deviation of less than 3. So what does this mean? It means 90% of the time we are going to be within 3 units of what the lab reports. And if we would say make several lab analyses and several scans out on the farm with given forage, we should get the exact same result on average. So I hope my very quick interpretation of statistical analyses has made some sense. With that said, and I somewhat spoke to this on the prior slide, the results are only as good as the sample. So what I've found in my experience actually is the cup is quite quick, and so I'm actually making 2 to even 3 scans relative to just a single scan, and then I will average the results of those 2 or 3 if we get an outlier type sample, and then that will become the dry matter measurement of record, whether it be used to make diet adjustments. But we have seen, and as I portrayed earlier on the change in dry matter over time, or even looking at say variation in sampling on a given day, corn silage is a little bit more heterogeneous of a crop, and getting samples of corn silage can be a little bit difficult. So results on a single scan are only as good as the sample, and that's why I would recommend even 2 to 3 scans on a given day and then averaging those results. With that said, I'll pass it back over to Hagai.
Last but not least, I'd like to turn it to Nathan from Vita Plus, sharing another real-world example, and then we'll get to the Q&A session with this panel in just a few minutes. So first, turning it to Nathan. Nathan, the stage is yours.
Hello, thank you guys for joining us here today. Excited to share some real-world experience. I'm a forage consultant working from Arizona out through Ohio, and excited to share some of the field experiences we've had with the cup to date. So first and foremost, as you all know, this was launched commercially back in August, which was right in the heart and at the beginning of harvest season for us. So we were able to use this cup along with our clients in multiple ways. One of the most powerful ways at harvest was to help stage fields prior to harvest, so that way we could help determine the order in which to take the corn silage off the field to most accurately hit the dry matter. It was also very convenient for our clients because they were able to frequently test the dry matter and very easily do that to account for changes during harvest when we had rain events out in the field, or when we were determining when to turn irrigation off to the field. We also were able to use this then to help calibrate moisture monitors on the choppers during harvest time as well, to give that peace of mind to the custom harvesters as they were going through the crop as well. The other really nice added benefit at harvest time then was we were able to test dry matters extremely frequently. On some cases, we were testing every load coming in, which gives us a more accurate representation of the true dry matter inventory at the field level. One benefit that we probably haven't talked about yet, and that I think has been key for a number of clients that we work with, has been for those purchasing forages. So often in the past, when we were purchasing forages from neighboring farms, we might be taking 1 out of every 5 loads or 1 out of every 10 loads, or just a couple samples a day in terms of dry matter, and sending those off to either the lab or using a Koster tester, and then determining the actual pay weight for those loads of forages. Well, we all know how much moisture can change throughout the field because of varying soil types, and also in impacting the various yields in the field. So we were able to utilize this technology to get a more accurate pay weight. So that way we were, again, able to have a much more consistent, accurate number for those dry matter tons coming in. So if you were adjusting to 32% or 35% dry matter to pay for those forages, we feel that this tool gave us the opportunity to do that more accurately. We also use this, again, with custom harvesters for those who are charging for harvesting. And then finally, switching gears, as we've gotten through harvesting or even implementing this the same time during harvest, was actually on the farm at feed out time. So most of the dairies that I've worked with on this have gone to at least multiple times a week, if not daily, dry matter measurements. The nice thing is, a lot of the feedback we would have in the past, of course, was we would do a dry matter test, maybe via Coster, microwave, what have you. But by the time we would get the results back, the results would be entered. We would already be almost all the way done feeding for the day. And so our results and our reaction to that was always well behind where we wanted to be. Now with this tool where we can get results in just a few seconds, we're able to input those results immediately into the feed software and make those changes on a daily basis. As others have mentioned, of course, we can quickly adjust to weather events that change the moisture of stored forages. And then certainly if you have any real substantial events where you get a cover blown off and exposed for a long time, or holes in bags, things like that, just another peace of mind tool there. And then lastly, I've hit on this a couple times already, but that accurate forage inventory is a piece that a number of people that I work with have been extremely excited about, because it helps them to predict what their run out date's going to be more accurately of those forages based on a more true inventory in the piles. With that, I will turn it back over to Haggai.
Thank you, Nathan. And we have now reached the Q&A session. Before we get into that, I would like to thank Dr. John Gazer, Rick Volten, John Paul Heavyside, and Nathan Hrnicek. Thank you for this invaluable information. And now let me look at some of the questions that were brought up. So I'll start with a question to Dr. John Gazer. The question here reads, besides forages, what other commodities would be important for a producer to test on a frequent basis?
Question, and one that could be addressed in two different ways. If we are speaking specifically to dry matter, any feed with probably greater than 15 to 20% water content or moisture content could be tracked. We've recognized in working with some of our closer working clients that will say make grain measures 2 to 3 times a week. We've even seen some moisture changes in dry ground corn, which could be meaningful depending upon the feed rate of the corn. But I would suggest any feeds that we are feeding more than 2 to 3 pounds of dry matter on the dairy or feed yard, we would want to have some fairly regular understanding of the moisture content as well as the nutritional profile. If we're speaking to commodities, and a little bit off topic or different direction, but speaking to commodities and nutritive content, we've recognized fairly substantial changes in protein and starch, for example, in previously thought of as consistent feeds such as soybean meal, corn grain, corn gluten feed, canola meal, you name it. It seems there's probably unrecognized nutrient change opportunities, say within a given month's time. But the topic today was dry matter, so hopefully I've hit the question.
The question is, where can I get SCIO cup? So that's a question for me at Consumer Physics. So if you're a DFA member, you can contact your DFA account manager. If you're a Vita Plus customer, please contact your Vita Plus consultant. Or you can also visit our website at consumerphysics.com. That's one word, consumerphysics.com. Look for the forages analysis, and you can see the product there. You can buy it online. Related question is, how much does it cost? So the list price is $1,500 for the cup, so $1,500 for the cup, and an annual subscription fee of $1,200 per year. That's for the cloud services, ongoing updating of the Forage database, obviously support and other services. I have here a question for DFA. So that's for Rick or John Paul. So what value does DFA see in the collaboration with SCIO? How does it help DFA's members?
Paul, add any comments in too. First off, I think it goes back to the technology fitting into what we try to service our members with products that can help them make better, faster, and smarter decisions on the farm. The other thing I think, and John Paul touched about this a little bit earlier, has been the tremendous customer support that we've seen from the people at Consumer Physics. Any questions or that arise from these farms are easily addressed and quickly, and helping that producer kind of make the right decision on how to use the cup for their operation.
I think Rick covered it well.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Another question here is, let me see, what materials are you covering and what will be available moving forward? So that's a question that comes up frequently here. So SCIO Cup measures currently green chopped corn, corn silage, legume silage, grass silage, mixed of legume and grass silage, small grain silage, fresh haylage, and we're also working on high moisture corn and dry shelled corn. The nice thing about SCIO, as I mentioned before, as it's connected to your phone and to the cloud, is that we keep updating the different forage types that you're able to measure with SCIO Cup, and it's seamless. So one other question that we got here is related to this, is to maintain accuracy of measurement over time, is recalibration automatically done, or is there a procedure that needs to be performed by the user? So yes, the answer is it is automatically recalibrated. Additional calibration types or forage types are added, and that's all seamless to the user since it uses your app and it uses our cloud or the internet. So that's all done online. Let's see, we have some time for a couple more questions. Let me see here. This will be a question for, okay, so can other chemical entities be determined using SCIO Cup? We currently focus on dry matter, which is the attribute that changes the most over time. So it's the most important one to track frequently, as you've just also seen in Dr. John Gazer's presentations. So more parameters are examined, but it's still in research mode. So right now, we cover all the forage types that I mentioned before. Let's see. And I see a lot of questions coming in. We will try our best to answer them all here or in email. We can also respond in email. Another question I'm getting here is, how accurate is the device? Well, yes, so you've seen the validation study that was conducted at Rock River Labs. It's very accurate. It was and is continuously validated in the lab and in the field, together also with our partners, Rock River Labs. It's probably, I'd say, the most accurate testing method outside the lab. So like Dr. John Gazer mentioned, after chemical, NIR, so for testing dry matter in forage and other commodities. Forage is difficult to test due to its physical nature. Now I'm getting into some physics. So when running comparisons to other methods, it's important to follow very specific protocols. And with us, the protocols are very straightforward. You put it in the cup, you click on the button, and you get the results on your phone. Okay, so it can get very cold here in the Northeast. what is the range of temperature that forage needs to be for accuracy. So the range is 38 through 90 Fahrenheit, 38 to 90 degrees, and we're continuously expanding that. Let's see if we have other interesting, we have a lot of questions coming in, so thank you guys for asking so many good questions. Let's see what I have here. So yes, where can I buy it? I mentioned either contact your account manager at DFA, Vita Plus, or you can also go online and buy it online at consumerphysics.com. Let's see. TMR. So that's a question that I see from a couple of folks here. Can you test TMR? So TMR will be added in the future. Right now, we test the list of forage types I mentioned before. And we have time for one more question. Let me see what we have here. So you have various suppliers of the cup. Does one supplier data mesh or add to the other supplier data? Or is the data specific to build a specific supplier database? No. So the nice thing about this being an online solution that uses our algorithms in the cloud is that we do leverage this data, this big data, to provide you with the most accurate results. So yes, obviously it's, we take all privacy measures, but yes, we do make sure to leverage the big data to make sure that we provide you with the most accurate results. And like I said, it's constantly being updated and new forage types are being added. So with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time in the middle of the day to join us for this webinar. I would like to thank again the speakers, Dr. John Gazer, Rick Volten, John Paul Heavyside, and Nathan Hrnicek. I invite you to go online on our site, read more about the product, and stay tuned for an email, follow-up email with a recording of this webinar that you can share with others and with more information. Stay safe, thank you, and goodbye.